Just at this point, are there any changes? Did you guys all get a chance to look at the July 17th meeting minutes? If there's no changes, then we'll move forward with those, but I just want to make sure you all, have had a chance to see it. And again, we corrected, Steve, the last time you weren't here, but we did correct the minutes per your suggestion, so thanks for catching that. So what we wanted to do today, and Supervisor Garrity's unable to make it today, and I think Supervisor McDonald is coming. I just think he's a few minutes late. So last time we were here, we asked, I was just talking about you. We had asked for consideration to have the draft RFP to us, hopefully this month, as you gathered looking at your agenda. That's not ready yet. But Brian is prepared to talk with us today more about it and kind of give us, again, an update on what's going on. But while we're waiting for that document to be fully put together, a suggestion was made that perhaps we could review, as one of our goals for this committee, review the completeness of the functions for the RFP and the proposed structure of the functions as full service or limited service. And you saw that in one of your attachments here. I think what I'd like to do at this point is just have Brian give you an overview of where that working group is at and what information they're looking for from this group to be able to give some feedback.
Okay. Thank you.
If that's okay.
Yeah. And Ross, I think, is the guy who's going to be able to talk to the details of this. But what you have before you is really, I think, a pretty significant part of the substance of the RFP. Based on the feedback we get from you folks and the embellishment that goes into it to make it from a concept like this into an RFP. What we've got here is a number of different functions that we believe cover pretty much all the functions that could possibly be privatized at the airport, and we've got them broken down into different groups. And if you look at your chart, you can see the first column that says Rich Air with an X or a slash is something that the current FBO operator performs or is responsible for performing under the current contract. And then you can see that it's required or optional in the next column. Then it says new full service and new limited service. What that means is full service, we are proposing that certain elements for a full service FBO have to include the required, the ones with the R that appear in those boxes. So a full service FBO would have to provide the fueling service, the transient tie downs, and a couple of other functions that are in there. The other category would be a limited service operator. And a limited service operator, those are all optional, but someone who proposes to do limited service could provide one or more of those optional services based on their business plan and their interest in providing them. And what we're looking for is, I guess, one, your advice on whether you think that covers all the functions that are necessary at the airport and appropriate to privatize. If there are others that we don't have in there that should be addressed. And two, if the specific descriptions of them need more, need less, if they're over-inclusive, if they're just incorrect. That's the kind of feedback we're seeking. And I'll talk to you about one thing that it's next on the agenda, but I'll just bring it up so it doesn't hang out there. Airfield maintenance. In New York, we have a prevailing wage law, and it's based on the prevailing wage constitutional provision. What that means is that when you provide a service as a private contractor to a public entity, certain functions in maintenance of a building or a public work construction project have to be paid the prevailing wage in the area. For all intents and purposes, most times that becomes union wages for the different trades involved. The Department of Labor used to issue Counsel's Office opinions on what was covered under prevailing wage and what was not. They don't do that anymore. Now you have to guess, you have to ask for a schedule, and it's up to the contractor to make sure that he gets the wage rates and the trades correct, otherwise he's going to get dinged for a violation. I am trying through the informal channels that I have at the Department of Labor to get at least an informal opinion on whether maintenance of the airfield, because it's not a building, would be covered under Article 9 of the Labor Law and therefore subject to prevailing wage. Obviously that's going to make a major impact on what any contractor might want to do and what any offerer might want to offer for maintenance services, but I'm trying to get that answer. So, I think that's kind of where we are from my perspective, and Ross obviously can offer more details as questions come up or suggestions come up.
Ross, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the chart you prepared, and then that way field some questions?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, it's Brian outlined it pretty well, but that's basically what I did here. The process was to go through the existing FBO contract, identify which services are required, and then I compared that with the rates and fees that are established by the FBO to find out what they provide that may or actually not be required, to get a comprehensive list of all the different services that are currently being provided at the airport and what's required versus what's optional, and to try and outline what is truly necessary for a full service FBO versus a limited service FBO. And principally the limited service FBOs are your specialized aviation service operators. Those are your aircraft maintenance facilities, avionics, propeller shops, aircraft interiors, detailing, those type of services.
Ross, there are two things I noticed that probably should be on the list. One is flight planning. Most airports you visit, really all it amounts to now is an internet connection, a computer set up with an internet connection, so pilots can get their latest weather reports, other information. So that probably should be on there, maybe under comfort and convenience. And then one thing that's probably understood but not explicitly there is bathrooms. Obviously the traveling public wants decent, clean bathrooms available. So, again, it's probably assumed, but
Right.
it might be listed explicitly.
Yeah, there's a lot of details that involve providing these services could get incorporated into an eventual contract, and that sample contract would likely be included in the RFP process. What we would do is kind of draft up a sample contract that we would attach as an exhibit to the RFP so that potential proposers would have an idea of what we expect them to be signing on to.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Getting back to that prevailing wage, has anyone looked at airports in New York State to see whether any airport is paying prevailing wage? I mean, wouldn't that be a good way of starting to look at this thing to see whether others have done this? I mean, even going so far as looking at JFK or something like that, do these guys have to look at paying, prevailing wages as considerable?
I've looked. I haven't found yet. I've looked through the resources of the Department of Labor website, and I've done other internet searches. I haven't been able to find that anywhere yet.
So what I look at is, just from a practical standpoint, it would seem that if I have to look really, really hard and to find a reason why I have to pay more money as a taxpayer, why am I doing that even? I mean, why am I going out of the way looking for trouble, looking to pay more money? Unless maybe I'm looking at it as a way of, keeping one option, making one option looking better than another option. And I just think this whole prevailing wage thing just kind of reeks of trying to go ahead and say we're not going to allow Mr. Skimmerhorn to bring in, people that he has working on his houses and stuff like that to take care of stuff. If there's no problem out there, I don't know why we're looking for a problem.
Well, simply because I don't want to have a contractor who goes into this not knowing what he's going to get into. If he has to pay prevailing wage, and we don't say that and alert him to that possibility, he's going to get hung up horribly. It's going to cost him a lot more money at the outset. I share your opinion of prevailing wage. I think it's an antiquated, ridiculous statute, but we're bound by it. It's the law, and I don't want to have anybody possibly hung up on it without us trying to at least give them the right guidance.
I agree on that, but again, I think if you're looking for trouble, then you're looking for trouble. I mean, then you could go, certainly you could go ahead and say, hey, I took a look, and you said you have taken a look, and I haven't found where in the state of New York anyone else has been required to do this. So I made the assumption, maybe it was wrong, that we didn't have to do it either. But it wouldn't seem to me that would be, an unreasonable respond if someone questions you on it down the road?
Well, this entity's, the Warren County's opinion on whether prevailing wage is going to be required or not doesn't mean a whit in the end of the day, because it's up to the Department of Labor. So if the contractor gets hung up on it, that's going to be between the contractor and the Department of Labor. I don't want to mislead anybody who's going to bid on
Well,
the
you're not
contract.
if you just leave it unsaid, you're not misleading anybody, and it is up to the Department of Labor, and they haven't gone ahead and taken it against any other airport that we can find, so why should we raise the issue here? That's my opinion.
I support Brian's inquiry. I think for the good of the public and the good of any contractor, let's go into this with our eyes open as to what the situation is. Speaking to Mr. Whitehead's concern, I think this is going to be an unusual situation you're looking for, because most airports are publicly maintained, and therefore the prevailing wage law doesn't apply to public employees, correct?
Correct.
So we're looking for a situation, maybe Dutchess County, that for a while privatized maintenance? I mean, to look for a precedent, you're looking for a
Albany,
fairly...
JFK, I mean...
Those are all public employees maintaining those
Are
airports.
they? I'm not
I
aware
assume
of that.
so.
I don't know.
Well, look, I mean, Avports, they operate Albany, and they're a private company, so
They do the
how does that
maintenance?
work? They do maintenance and
Okay.
stuff, and I would question to see what they would do, or what their issues are, if it needs to lead to a definition of our model, of what we need to look at moving forward. Massport, another example, they're a private entity that operates several airports in Massachusetts, Bedford, Worcester, stuff like that. They're on county-owned or city-owned airports, and, they may have the same answers that we're looking for, too.
So, Steve, what were the names then of those two again, the one in
Avport
Massport?
operates, well, for a closer example, they're a private company that operates Albany International Airport, and then you have Massport that operates several airports in Massachusetts. But Avports also includes, I believe, JFK as well, and stuff like that, in their umbrella.
So we could certainly look at those, Brian, right? Thank you.
Having a tiny bit with it at school board years, it comes at you from nowhere. Somebody makes a complaint to the Department of Labor, be it CSAA or whoever, and you don't know who even made the complaint. And they start the process, and you spend hours trying to figure it out. You're presumed guilty. That's unfortunate that our attorney can't go ahead and make the complaint ahead of time and ask for a ruling. Like he says, they could have in the past, but yet you're going to come to the enforcement people and find out. And I'm just saying it's wrong. It's wrong. I absolutely agree it's wrong, but it happens.
Supervisor Montesi?
Generally speaking, if it's a federally or state-funded project, it falls under the auspices of prevailing wage. We just went up to Shazy for Hudson Headwaters to do an after-construction cleanup, and that fell under prevailing rates, $38 an hour for maintenance folks. So, if you make the mistake and do the job without knowing that it's prevailing rates, it can bankrupt you. It's that simple. So erring on the side of caution is the right way to go, I believe, Brian, and I think you're right on that.
So, Lance, are we paying prevailing wages for the people that inspect the boats, for instance? I don't know.
Do you know the name?
I don't know that answer. That seems a little further afield, because the statute does say building, but my concern is that the Department of Labor, some people there think it's the Department of Organized Labor, so they stretch the statute as much as they can. I could see they would say, buildings in an airfield, that's close enough to building. I don't know if they include boats with that or not.
So how will this be resolved? I mean, if it looks like, when you're saying there is no way of giving an answer, then does it just put the whole thing, cast a doubt on the whole thing, and we can't proceed?
Well, no, I'm confident I'm going to get an informal answer, and I will include as much as I know in the RFP as disclosure to the prospective bidders, and let them roll the dice to the extent they wish to roll the dice.
Brian, maybe now's a good time to also ask you what the status is with the draft RFP, like when we can expect. I know there's been a few problems kind of like going along the way, or just some are really taking part of it, which again is good, but we're all here and we're discussing this, and I have some questions as well about this chart and some documents, but I was hopeful that perhaps the committee, while I'm sure they'll all take a look at all this information and provide feedback, as Tom already has pointed out a couple of things, but I'm more interested too in knowing if there will be a sample contract. We want to get this feedback, but if we're only going to be told that's going to be put in a different document, when will we see a draft of that document?
Well, we have a rough draft with some of the functions laid out in there. We want to flesh it out so that there are performance measures in each function. That's one of the things we're trying to establish is the best ways to hold the eventual provider to the standards in the contract, because it's not reasonable or workable to say if we believe there's a breach in the standards and we're just going to terminate the contract. Obviously that doesn't work, so we're trying to figure out for each particular function a way to establish benchmarks and to hold the contractor to those benchmarks. So we have a very rough draft. It doesn't have all the functions in there yet. It's a matter of collaborating and drafting. I mean, this is I think going to be the substance of it, the meat of it and the guts of it, and that's what we'd like to get the group's feedback on.
So far we've heard about the flight planning, the bathrooms. Are there additional comments, Tom?
Always.
I keep bringing
Sorry.
them, that's fine. No, don't apologize.
I noticed on the first page, aircraft maintenance, twin engine, I guess up to twin engine, that's fine. With one full-time A&P mechanic, A&P stands for airframe and power plant. Aircraft mechanics are licensed the same way pilots are licensed by the FAA. I just want to have the committee consider that perhaps we should ask for 2 mechanics. The reason being, there are operations where you need 2 mechanics. One guy needs to look at something to see how the propeller's coming around, where another guy is in the back of the engine looking for some mark on the back of a thing. So there are times when you need 2 mechanics to repair an airplane. It's just a 2-person job. And then the other thing is, it would seem an airport of our size should have a little redundancy. So if one mechanic is sick or on vacation or something, that you have at least one mechanic on duty. So the county would be going rather thin if all it required in its contract was one mechanic. That would be very minimal maintenance capabilities.
Is that going to exclude bidders to the extent that we're not going to get any? And where's that line? I don't know.
I don't think that would exclude, I mean, for years we've had 2 mechanics, and there's probably the potential work here for 4 mechanics. And this is the part of the, I keep saying half full, half empty. That's part half empty, that there's probably potential to do more airport maintenance here. So it'd be a step backward for our county if we went to only 1 mechanic.
I think Saratoga has 7 and Middlebury has 5. So I have to take exception with that, because if Saratoga has 7 and Middlebury has 5, and then we would have 2, I mean, at some point you can't have a gas station on every corner. And, there was a time when I was a kid, I used to repair TVs, and there was a TV repairman on every corner practically. Now there's things have changed. You don't have, perhaps there's enough business to keep Saratoga, employed, but not, every other airport. And if we were to put in requirements like that, somebody might say, well, geez, I'm going to have to take a loss on that, and that loss is going to be made up by the taxpayer, okay? And, there just aren't that many, and if you have to go from here to Saratoga to get that service done, so be it. Easier said than done, right? Okay, for example, I went out to the airport yesterday. For some reason, my nose strut, the toe ring failed, and there's oil on the ground. I can't fly that to Saratoga. I have to have somebody fix it here. If you have a small shop, one guy, everybody goes somewhere else because they never can get anything done. We have a big enough hangar for 4 mechanics. It's a county-owned hangar, I understand. So we should be having a shop here that attracts business, not sending it away. Now, if you get in a self-perpetuating cycle, if you have nothing available, then everybody goes someplace else. If you build a real shop, then people come and you actually make money. Mr. Clements is saying you want to have 2, not 1, okay? And so 1 would have taken care of your problem. 1 would take care of any problem that gets the heck over to the next one, it would seem. But, or you fly somebody in, if you have to fly somebody in to take care of the pump. But you can't ask the taxpayers to go ahead and put 4 people on staff just because the hangar's big enough to handle it.
Supervisor McDonald?
There's an area you can make money with, though. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity we're losing.
Then you should go into business, you should bid on that. But you shouldn't ask the taxpayer to go ahead and carry this.
I think what I'm seeing in the RFP is we're encouraging an FBO that's going to be a full-service FBO. It's going to bring jobs to this area. I met a young man a couple months ago who's going away to college. He wants to work as an A&P mechanic. That's his chosen field. Wouldn't it be nice if he could come home to Queensbury and live and work here? And that's why I'm thinking the county should be encouraging a full-service, fully staffed shop rather than what I would call a minimal shop.
I don't
Okay,
think the
let's
county's gonna
just-
lose a lot of money.
I don't see how the county loses money.
They lose money
Okay,
every
so
year.
let's just go by the hands that were flying up in the air. So,
That's all right.
I know that's okay. I love the participation in the discussion. That's great. Supervisor McDonald and Supervisor Beatty, then whoever else would like to talk.
This question is more directed towards Ross or Steve. Is there the kind of traffic or volume that could justify having at least 2 mechanics on? Well, it depends on the time. I mean, in the wintertime, it's dead. And we have maybe, 1 or 2 annuals a month in there, or, the wintertime or the summertime, we could have a breakdown every day almost. So it is definitely seasonable with our location. But I think maybe in a perspective of looking at, cost versus service, it's very rare to make money off in a maintenance service department. You're basically either cutting even or taking a loss every year. The idea is do you want to have or provide the service, regardless of whether you're making money or not? I guess I think that would be the question. Yes, there are tenants there, and it is nice to have the service available, but do you really want to focus on making money, or do you want to have the service? Because if you're focusing on making money, there is a very hard argument to make that you're going to make money, at least in our location, on that.
Do you think it's plausible enough to say that more individuals will want to keep their aircraft at that airport, knowing that if I need the service, I have adequate staffing there to service my airplane in the event that something goes wrong, like you were alluding to?
Sure, I think that's a fair assumption.
So do you think maybe we don't necessarily make money, or whoever is in charge of that, we don't necessarily make money on the maintenance service per se, but we bring in traffic with the mindset of these pilots have the confidence in the services being provided? Do you think we make up money in that direction? But I think that's, just from a layman's standpoint, I think that's very plausible to suggest.
I don't know how much traffic you would increase, but at least for the very sake of, is it an attractive option for people that are not based there to look to base there, is one option, yes.
Yeah, I would say if you're trying to, compete for base tenants with other local airports like, Saratoga, Argyle, Harris Field, and you're trying to attract, tenants to your airfield, having those services available on the field is definitely an attractant for based aircraft.
Yeah. I think I would say that a minimum of 2 would be...
exactly why it was probably put in there in
Yeah.
the first place 10 years ago when they drafted this in the contract. I'm sure that's exactly why it was there, and it's something that the committee will have to decide.
I think that's a reasonable suggestion for facilities then.
All right, we'll come back to that then. Supervisor Beatty?
Yeah, I can see having a minimum, whether it's 1 or 2. I think the supply and demand law of business should take precedent, and will take precedent. And if there's a reason why Saratoga has 7, there's a reason why they have 7. They have the work available. I think it's an unnecessary burden to put a high minimum in an RFP to a potential lessees when the demand is not there. So we're going to say, hey, you got to make sure that you spend this amount in case we get a demand. And to me, that's just bad business. I'm sure that anybody who bids on this, if there's a demand, they'll bring in more mechanics.
If they can make money on it, they'll bring more mechanics in, and that's simple, basic business supply and demand. So let's not create something that's not there. There should be a minimum, I agree with that. Whether it's one mechanic or two, I'm not sure, I'll let you guys hammer that out. But going above that, and even thinking about that, should be solely the responsibility of whoever leases the airport. That should be their business decision, and not ours. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And I think, Ross, too, just to add here, what I struggle with, and I don't know if the committee is or not, is we're talking about if there's money to be made, if there's a need, but I'm still unclear what's the expense. I don't know what it costs to have 1 or 2 people. I think this is a great revenue chart. I think this is a great working document to start talking about the draft RFP, but I'm hopeful, and I'm going to ask it again, I ask it every month, when do you think we'll see what's it going to cost? So in the theory of it's county owned and operated versus going out, and asking a private entity, what are these things costing in terms to make a good decision on whether or not it's something the county should be looking at?
Well, as far as aircraft maintenance, I don't know of any public entity that does aircraft maintenance, so that would be, those expenses would be difficult to try and nail down without getting voluntary participation from your private businesses to provide that type of information. I don't know that that's likely to happen. In here, you'll notice that for the aircraft maintenance, for example, that currently is required, the intent here moving forward is to make that optional as a full-service operator. So the full-service operator, the entity that provides the fueling service, the ramp handling services, they don't necessarily have to bid on aircraft maintenance facility and take on that responsibility. The idea is to allow specialization of various services at the airport. There may be entities out there that's all they do is aircraft maintenance, and they may want to take the opportunity to provide that service at the airport. And by making that a separate, distinct, biddable item, it allows you to bring in those type of businesses that may not be interested in taking on all the responsibilities of a full-service FBO, but be able to take on the responsibilities of what they already specialize in. Maybe it's avionics, maybe it's propellers, maybe it's aircraft interiors. That hangar can be used for a multitude of different services. Can they provide, the emergency response services that we might need, for that type of repair that you discussed earlier with your strut. There's the intent here is to allow flexibility in the bidding process so that, a full-service FBO, the guy who's going to do the fueling on the airport, maybe he has other ideas that are going to work better for the airport and still attract customers. We want the experts, the business providers, to be able to tell us what they think is going to work well for the airport.
So Mr. Schwenker went ahead and made the good point that it's required really to have at least one person there. Mr. Clemens thinks it'd be better to have 2, yet here they're both optional. So what happens if you go through all this bidding stuff, no one bids on this stuff, and now what are you going to do? I mean, it seems like if you have, pick one from column A, one from column B, and you don't get enough bidders, that you might get stuck with something that just doesn't work. And maybe Mr. Skimmerhorn's a successful bidder, but now you won't even keep one mechanic there because it's a loss to him. But yet you need 1 or 2. I mean, so and the other thing, right in the top one, I don't understand why you would have an NA on a fuel sales for limited service versus an optional, for instance, unless you're not telling me something like you're thinking about the county retaining the avgas services completely, and because that's the biggest moneymaker in the whole thing, and a large part of the reason why any FBO is going to bid on this thing, limited or not, is to make money off of that. So when you say NA versus optional, I mean, that's a big question to me.
Sure, there's only one fuel farm at the airport, and you really can't commingle fuel between 2 different providers. So only one provider, the full service provider, will have the option of providing fuel services at the airport. So a limited service provider, someone who specializes in a particular service, other than doing the fueling, they won't have the option or the ability to provide fueling.
So I understand when it's a new fuel service ARC required, I understand. But new limited service, instead of saying O, which I would expect, a lot of these are, it says NA, as if, not applicable. Can you explain what not applicable means as opposed to option?
Because there is no facilities available for someone other than potential for full-service FBO to provide that service. It's not plausible.
Well, right now, he has a limited service contract, and he gets to use that, and,
No, it's a full-service
$7.5.
contract. Currently, it's a full-service FBO contract, all-inclusive. And you have
Our idea
control-
for the structure here is that the entity that wants to do the fuel service, because that's the biggest moneymaker, the entity that wants to do that also has to do these other required services and make themselves the full-service FBO operator. So you don't get the low-hanging fruit unless you're also prepared to bring the ladder and go up for the higher fruit. So the full-service operator gets the fueling operation. So it's not available to a limited service operator.
Okay, so let me clarify, I think Mr. Clemens asked this question a couple of meetings ago. Are we going to have two RFPs out there, one for like a full-service deal, the kind of way, and I don't know what full-service means the way I'm thinking about it versus the way someone else might be thinking about it, please correct me. But, are we going to have basically an RFP that would mimic the proposal that we got, the informal proposal that we got from Mr. Skimmerhorn back in February as one option, and maybe another RFP saying, let's do the same kind of arrangement that we have now with Mr. Skimmerhorn, but open it to other bidders as well? Is that what we're looking at doing?
Not exactly. One RFP
Yeah.
with two groups of services. One is the full service, which is, I think it's there 5 or 6 functions on here that are full service. And if you want to do the fuel, you have to do these other things that go along with it, and that makes you the full service operator.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to be the full service operator, you're certainly free to propose one or all of the optional services as well. And you'll say, Rich Air may say, we can do everything at that airport. That was his proposal a few months ago. We can do everything there, so we're going to bid on all these services. However, we also want to leave it open to entities that may do just one or two of the limited services. We just want to do aircraft maintenance. We want to bid just on that piece of it. And on that piece of it, that proposal can compete with any other proposer for that particular limited service option. One RFP, but you can choose how many of the services you want to propose on.
Then my concern remains that when you look at that item, aircraft maintenance, even if you're the full-service bidder, that's an option whether you want to take it or not. And if you view that as a money loser, you may not take it. And if nobody else wants to take it as a money loser, now you're left with a situation where he has an O-ring that's failed and he can't get off the field.
And I think your point is speaking to what Supervisor McDonald brought up and what Supervisor Beatty also said, Travis. So I guess what I'm asking for is what the pleasure of this committee would be in terms of a recommendation back to them. Is that something that should be required, that you as a group feel should be required, or are you comfortable with it as an option?
Based on what Mr. Schwenker said, yeah, I believe it has to be required to have at least one. And
Dr. Schwenker, what do you think?
We need to have viable maintenance. Having one mechanic who may be off or who may be sick, you can't do a number of tasks with one mechanic. You can't hang a propeller with one mechanic. You have to take the propeller off for a number of functions because it takes two people to hold it and get the little funny bolts. So I understand that you can make or lose money doing mechanical services. The ones that are successful find ways in the off-season to say, we'll do the upholstery work in the off-season, something that takes time. So there's ways people build this business, and not having a hangar that's set up, that's owned by the county for a fairly good-sized maintenance operation as opposed to the old tiny one back, somehow ought to have a viable maintenance operation. And it's going to take some work because we have our current mechanical staff is advanced age. We're going to have to start over at some point, very soon. what that looks like, the county has an interest in it being a viable operation. How that's accomplished, it's going to take a lot of finesse, but that has to be part of the deal.
So I guess, Brian, can you bring that information back to your working group?
Sure, absolutely.
With
I mean,
that
if it's-
feedback and that discussion, because I think that, that's certainly one that came up as a concern.
If it's the sense of the group that that should be one of the core full-service functions, then we'll bring that back, sure. We want to get this right, it's not,
Well, and again, the purpose of this group is to take that expertise, be able to give some recommendations. We all recognize ultimately it's up to the facilities committee and the board of supervisors, but what we want to do here is provide that valuable input. So that's what I don't expect. I know you all just got this chart. I think it was yesterday, if my days are right. So I know, you aren't coming to the table today having that long list of feedback with it, but I do think that over the next few days or the next few weeks, as you have an opportunity, please hit reply to all of our airport advisory group and give those comments. That's something that can easily be forwarded over to the working group. Dr. Smiker?
There's some parts of the mechanical maintenance, if you will, operation, aircraft maintenance as opposed to other maintenance, that are become necessary. So if you're going to deal with certain outside companies like NetJets or something, they usually want a drug program for the mechanics. They want a lot of other documented certification if you're going to be able to work on a transient aircraft for some other people sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're working on an aircraft for somebody who's doing charter or even sightseeing flights.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of things you need besides just an AUP license.
Jeff?
I think that might get into what Brian was alluding to, some of the performance requirements.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to say, okay, you got 2 mechanics, but
But it's
what
a-
are the functions the minimum functions that you want to have based, at the airport? What are the things that kind of the must-haves? If we're going to have a maintenance shop, we got to have these types of things
And
versus
Right, and I'm
specialties that are only,
Right.
upholstery or only avionics. or
Right, there's some basic things, and I'll say this, I agree with Doug that you want minimum requirements so that it's viable. We don't want to dictate beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to bring back to them as well. I have a question, Ross. If we could just switch over for a second to the airport cafe. I dread even bringing it up, but I do want to have those discussions here. I think they are important. Many of you may have seen a recent article about the Aviator. It hit national news. It was awesome. It talked all about how it's a one-of-a-kind restaurant and view here in Warren County, and it gave a lot of attention to the Balloon Festival and to our airport here in Warren County. So it was a great PR piece that really highlighted a restaurant that we're collecting revenue on. To an extent where we haven't collected that type of revenue in a very long time because of the services it's offering. You have Airport Cafe here, and I'm just wondering if there's been dialogue about what exactly that means. The one thing I've heard from this group is breakfast is very important to them, but I would be concerned if that starts to talk more about a lunch or a dinner, or, we've gone back and forth for years about how that contract gets amended or hasn't been amended, or whatever your feeling is on it. It's been hashed out. But what's the discussion behind the Airport Cafe? It looks like this is going to be required of a full-service operator,
No.
or no? It's
Currently,
required
that's the
now, but it will be optional for
Be
a
optional.
full service.
Yeah, in the same space that it was in before, prior, we would have to have, discussions with the committee about, how that might take shape, if at all.
So I guess I want to throw it out to this group because you've been talkative about it since November. What are your feelings on this aspect of the draft RFP? Or are there no feelings and we've gotten past what we all think about it?
In my opinion, it probably should be optional. Following Mr. Beatty's comments, we don't want to be dictating to private enterprise, you have to do this. But certainly, if we get to review some of the proposals received, and one of the proposals would be to restart that cafe for breakfasts and lunch, if Aviator's not serving lunch at that time, that would be a positive, in my opinion, as far as that proposal, that they're willing to do that.
Okay, Supervisor McDonald?
I'm curious, even if we suggest that as being optional, which I would prefer it being optional rather than mandatory. I'm curious if we should include language about competing hours. If that lunch, that breakfast segment carries over, it crosses over into the lunch hours, maybe it turns into brunch hours,
Mhm.
and it competes with the aviators. Maybe that's something that we should take into account there. I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing.
Is there, Brian, as it stands right now, any type of language?
There is not.
There's none. And I know Supervisor Sokol's mentioned many times about the idea of, you know, a continental breakfast, and again, I realize now that's falling under optional, but under the comfort and care, or comfort and convenience, I don't see the O's next to that. I assume those should...
Yeah, I
are-
didn't know what to do with that one. That's very subjective.
Okay.
Thing, so I wasn't sure how
Yeah.
to handle that.
But like perhaps right now, I know, Steve, you guys have coffee and a few things in an honor box that you're losing money on, but there's an honor box over there that's more of a comfort and care. Maybe that's something that could go in the details of the contract to have the basic coffee available in a full service contract, or what do you think?
Yes, again, it sounds like a nickel and dime thing though, to
Yeah.
somebody going into there. I mean, that's
Doesn't
a
really.
given. If you're gonna
Okay.
have coffee and ice and paper typically for incoming and outgoing pilots.
It's just going to be there.
The otherness, extras that come with it are basically based on feedback.
Okay.
And I think maybe we should be allowed, or anybody should be allowed to have that flexibility based on
Right.
the feedback to change and critique what their comfort and service should be. Because
Okay.
each area and location is going to be different from one to the next, so
Okay.
this is an opinion on
So I think those are all things that your group, probably should take into consideration, and good points as well. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on that you guys have talked about, Ross, Jeff, or no? Okay. Are there any other things looking at this chart? Again, I know it's just been a couple of days, but that you want to put out there at this point, or take a little bit of time and respond via email?
I would feel comfortable a little more time to review it.
Yeah.
I think it
So would
was,
I.
this morning I was
Yeah.
viewing everything. 19 hours is when it was sent.
Yeah. Thank you for being so specific on that 19 hours.
Oh, it's a lot of information
It
to
is
take
a lot.
in
So,
19 hours.
What my concern, Brian, is if we come back with more specific feedback for the September meeting, are we missing an opportunity, or we'll still have that time to give that feedback in September?
I
It
think
won't
the
be done by
feedback's
then?
important, and even if it's, hopefully it'll be more complete than it is
Okay.
now, but it's certainly not going to be anything that's
Okay.
final that we can't add things to or delete things from or change things in. Absolutely.
So is the committee comfortable then in taking this information and looking it over, coming back to the table at our next meeting, and really being able to have some specific suggestions, if not beforehand? Okay, because 19 hours is not enough. No way, shape, or form. The other attachment that got sent out that I really can't read well, and I don't think it's because of my eyesight, is it was attachment number C in the email that went out, and that was the final order, I think because it's old. But is there a maybe one, are you pulling that up, please? Is it better online than it is printed?
Yeah, which one is it?
It's the
file.
DC document.
I'll just open
82-12-25.
Where do you see 82-12-25? Oh, look at that.
All right, so that's that one. All right, and then 80 to 1225 is the final order.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, it's a,
it's a little better on there,
so
Days of typewriters.
yeah, yeah, and then
Oh,
a
yeah.
scan. This was scanned and sent to me from US DOT.
yeah. Okay.
I think we need a new scanner.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the best quality. It's the same quality as you can probably print. I don't think the original file is going to make any difference in
Okay.
legibility, unfortunately.
Is there a specific paragraph that relates directly to Glenn's fault? Is there one good paragraph for us to look at, try and zoom in and read that's going to make sense to us all? Final.
What's the conclusion? The conclusion was that Glens Falls was not eligible for essential air service after deregulation.
Is that like the final paragraph, or?
Honestly, I didn't reread it before I sent it back out.
The way I read it,
It's 11 pages.
they weren't eligible, and then even if they were eligible, the requirement is 2 round trips daily, and with the proximity of the airport, there's no way God's green earth that anybody is going to go ahead and take that on. So, have 2 round trip flights available, every day.
Yeah, and by definition, they describe what the essential air service requirements are: 15 passenger seat aircraft to a medium hub airport. Although Albany is not a medium hub airport, I think Manchester, New Hampshire is the closest medium hub airport.
Wait, hold it right there. In light of our tentative decisions in Order 81-836 to define Glens Falls Essential Air Service determination as 0. We have decided, as discussed below, to make it final our tentative findings that Glens Falls access to National Air Transportation System can be alternatively met through the current air service available at nearby Albany County Airport. So,
So page 5. So this was in response to Supervisor McDonald. We wanted to get additional information on that.
This is awesome. This is
Okay.
great.
Yes, Dr. Spanker.
I think it's a moot point anyway. The essential air service is currently in budgetary limbo.
good point.
I did look, I have all this airport data. There are 118 airports that are over 5,000 feet in the northeast 10 states. 56 of those have some kind of commercial air service. 16 are essential air service only, like Saranac and Messina. 5 are turboprop only, like Watertown. And then the others have some kind of either low cost or other service. The low cost tend to go into old Air Force bases like Plattsburgh, Niagara Falls, Portsmouth. All of them with full-size aircraft have at least 6,000 feet. That's Trenton. Everything else is 6,700 feet or longer.
And some of the communities like Cape Air is providing essential air service with a Cessna 402. That aircraft does not actually meet the definition of essential air service. The local communities have to pass a resolution waiving the requirement for the 15-passenger aircraft in order for an airline like Cape Air to be considered for essential air service. Because technically they don't meet the definition, and the United States Department of Transportation does not have the flexibility to to just award something other than what is legally required. The system needs to be revamped.
Yeah, if you look at what's actually doing it, it's all on waivers now. So, Jamestown is with single-engine caravans, and the problem with Cape Air's model is the Cessna 402 has been made for decades, and they're going to have to go with something else.
Yeah, they've been contemplating changing their fleet. That's all they fly is 402s, but sooner or later they're going to have to change their fleet over to something else. The similar model, like Southwest, all they fly is 737s. That's it.
Yes, sir. You're waiting patiently. I'm sorry?
It's a pretty old document, like 38 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still valid. That's really
When I contacted them back in 2012, the gentleman I spoke to, and I forget his title at the DOT, but he indicated that it was not up for consideration again. So the county can certainly, ask. It wouldn't hurt to
So this, I think what,
try again.
from talking with you, Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the law hasn't changed. This determination was based on the law that is still law, so the only way this determination would change would be if the law, if it went a legal route through the, federal, Congress to change the
Yeah, I think it
rules
would
and
take
law
an
that
act of
applies.
Congress, literally.
Yeah.
Brian, do you want to weigh in on that at all?
There were at least 2 arguments made. There was a first one where our request was denied, and then we asked for reconsideration, and that was also denied. Made the same arguments that, look, some of the county is more than 45 miles away from Albany because the many of the users are in the northern part of the county. There were several different arguments that the county made, and they came to the same finding and said there's no need for subsidy for air service at Glens Falls because Albany's close enough. And I think that the program has, even though the law may have stayed the same, I think the program has only contracted since then. There are fewer and fewer airports that are getting these subsidies, and a lot of them are in remote locations in Alaska and Hawaii. So I think, if anything, the chance is less now than it was 38 years ago.
Good document to have. Thank you, and good discussion. So before moving on from this chart, is there anything else as a group you want to talk about today regarding this chart? Ms. Bramer?
Sorry, it's not about the chart.
Oh, that's okay. Hold your thought for 1 second, then we'll come right back to you. So the only other thing, Ross, I would say, again, I'd really like to see more expenses on what we can report on. Is that something that we could see next meeting?
I will, what specifically expenses? Are you talking FBO expenses?
Well, just as they're relevant, when you look at the revenue side of things, I mean, to me, again, unless the group feels differently, and please give me the feedback on this. I mean, we've talked a lot about what something would cost to run versus the revenue that would be brought in and how much of that the county's taking on. I know we've talked a lot about, like, lawn service, plowing, things like that. You know, what's it going to cost to the county versus in the FBO? Some of these different revenue streams that you have here, it's just, you know, I think Travis even brought up before the things that say should be 3% versus 10%. I mean, I'm just looking for a little more detail on expenses. Is that something that the committee is interested in seeing, or you don't think that's helpful?
What? I have one question. I'm probably ignorant, but the FBO revenue, $926,000, Mr. Waters, is that gross or is that net? That's gross fuel sales. Okay.
Right, it's all gross. Everything there is gross, and then that's what Supervisor Seaver is alluding to. What are the expenses that go along with each of those different revenue streams? So, after, you know, when you get down to the bottom, you know, the 1.3 million, you got to deduct out what their overhead, their expenses are for providing all those different services.
And from what I hear is that the county's considering a partial county-owned and operated. Just before that could really be considered, what's it going to cost us? Is that something you could bring back?
I would have to get some more information from the FBO on their expense side. They do provide some very limited expense reports in their annual submittal that they provide to us, but there's not much in the way of detail. It would be difficult for me to break that out into each one of these line items, but there is
right.
a pretty much a total that's provided in their annual financial reports that we could share.
Well, I guess I mean more about the county's aspect of things. If you're proposing the county take over X, Y, and Z, what's the estimate from the counties? I mean, I don't know, given the fact they're a private
If the county
FBO.
wants to, you know, the committee directs me to prepare a, proposal in that regard, I would absolutely have to come up with an estimated expense.
So that's not happening right now, Brian. That's off the table.
I think that's the function of the Facilities Committee, if they direct that, I think.
I think when Ross developed this table that has the FBO, current FBO services, the descriptions, and then the revenue breakdown, part of what was the effort in developing the description was, okay, what is actually involved with generating that revenue so that we could start putting our hands around, okay, what kind of equipment, material, and labor goes into that. So to the extent that if the current FBO wants to share some information on what, how many people do they have, doing fuel sales, what is the level of, mechanics they have. I know they have two, but I think they're both part-time, so I think right now it would be helpful to have some of that information, frankly. Some of these revenues are what I would consider passive revenues, that they are rental income on hangars or tie-downs that are almost no effort. Other ones require 7 days a week coverage from, I think, 8 to 7, 8 to 6. So those are simply just, okay, how many personnel and how many hours a day and what are you paying them? But I think that's where, in getting to that point, this was the first step in getting there. Okay, what is actually involved with the description of that service and the revenue that's generated, so they can go, okay, here's what they do in order to generate that revenue. So what is it all comes down to equipment, labor, and material, every single one of these. So I think that would take some time, but I think some input from the FBO would be helpful on it too.
I guess my only point being is that if we're going to see a draft RFP, you know, and being a little bit in the dark right now in terms of really what are the nuts and bolts of it, if that same idea is being floated as an option, I know that this committee and I know our facilities committee and the board would want to know what are those expenses to the county. And you can't make a good decision on any of this if you don't know what the expenses are when you're looking at the revenue.
Right, and that decision point really is upon, you know, the end of, you know, receiving our RFPs and doing presumably some negotiation with one or more bidders. So that's kind of the final decision point, certainly. At the same time, I've had lots of supervisors tell me that the county should not be developing a plan, and if they are developing a plan, they should be doing it, you know, among county staff and not sharing it out there. That is something that can come much later once we have proposals, and then we can really look at the options and decide. So I think it's going to take some time to get there. The good news is we have time. The current FPO contract goes through the end of next year, so we have a year and 3 months, year and 4 months. So I think we're in good shape where we're at now. That will have to be developed, I agree, before the board can make a decision.
So, Jeff, and I certainly appreciate the county's response on that. Are there any feedback to those comments from the advisory committee at this point, or no?
Other than the standpoint that you have a lot of time, which I don't believe is true, but and the other thing is, it would be helpful to get all these costs from the FBO, but that's all proprietary information. I certainly would not share it as a business owner. And if I did, I wouldn't want to be held responsible if I gave you some misinformation that might have misdirected you. So I think it's going to take a lot of time for you to go ahead and figure out whether you're going to make or lose money, and that a year and 3 months or whatever, to the point where drop dead, you got to close the airport tomorrow because you don't have an FBO, you don't have anybody that, you know, there, or, you know, it's unrealistic. And the drop dead point is not going to be a year and 3 months from now. It's going to be many months before that to know that, well, do we have bidders or don't we have bidders? And now we have, you know, 6 months to scramble to figure out how we're going to actually keep this airport open, because if we don't, the DOT is going to be all over us. They're going to pull all our funding for roads and everything else because we're not meeting the obligations that we agreed to when we had this grant, that grant, and every other grant. So, you know, we do not have the time, and, you know, I dislike it when I hear that we have lots of time.
And Dr. Schmeicher?
I mean, there's other counties that are operating in, that's more public information.
Right.
We can at least get that for what their expense information is. I'm not saying it's precise, but it at least gives a ballpark if we know.
Right. Now, we've pulled their budgets together, and we have, you know, their expenses that they lay out there for operating FBOs. So we have examples of other municipal operated budgets that we can glean information from.
Could we put that into a form of a chart similar to this, looking at other, I'm not suggesting we ask for proprietary information. What I'm suggesting is that the information that's out there that's public, couldn't we put it into a similar...
I may have already put it together.
Something similar.
I'll find that, see if not, I'll make sure it's done.
I thought it was kind of diced up a little bit,
and
but...
one of the things I think we've been talking about is having EDC's consultant come and brief their report, which actually details various municipal operations, their revenue, the number of employees, who does the maintenance, and then what their net costs are. So
it does, but as you know, all these airports have different, you know,
right.
You have to take that into account.
Not apples to apples.
And I think
study to just get there's some information out there.
But I think that person, didn't they go to the working group? Had a meeting with the working group?
Ed?
No,
Ed
your
was there.
consultant.
No, the Wiedemann group.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Others, that's fine. We had been
Okay.
working with them because they were involved in the original.
Well, just as long as it's on a radar screen, Tom.
It seems that what the county DPW should do to give the taxpayers some options here is come up with essentially a business plan, although they are not in business, essentially a business plan as far as what would a county-operated FBO look like from a financial standpoint. In the first meeting I came to, we've got a good handle on revenues based on experience, and the current FBO does have to show us what their revenues are. So we have a pretty good idea what the revenues are, a baseline of revenues at this airport.
Mhm.
What we now really need, we crave, is a good estimate of the expenses. And although there are differences from one municipally run FBO to another, still, I think based on those numbers, you could extrapolate, that we've got twice as many planes, or we've got half the number of planes, but you've got to come up with some decent estimate of what is it going to cost the county to staff an FBO and provide the same level of service, good service, that we're getting now. And only then can the supervisors make a comparison of which way the taxpayer works best for the taxpayers.
Jeff?
I agree, and I think that's where we're heading. But that does not help us get this RFP developed and get the best possible proposals that we can. That's really our focus. I would just urge the group to focus on that. We need to develop this RFP to the point where we're getting good proposals, and us, this group, or even the facilities committee, talking about a municipal operation doesn't help us get good proposals on this RFP. In fact, it could be do just the opposite. So, exactly. So, I'm with you 100%, and we're a year from the FEON. I think Travis is right. The board can't make a decision in December of 2018, but the board can make a decision in the summer of 2018. We did the same with the railroad contract and gave a 6-month notice for a company to relocate thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of steel off of our tracks over the course of 6 months, so that a new company could bring thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of steel onto our tracks. The footprint of the current operation is manpower and some equipment, and largely municipal-owned buildings, because the private buildings are still going to be Rich Air no matter what, or Skimmerhorn Aviation no matter what. So those don't really go away. Those aren't impacted by any change. So I think the sweet spot for us is probably next summer to have a board decision. That means RFP needs to be out this winter so that we can get a good response on the RFPs, and then give ourselves time to start negotiating with the top candidates and have that flexibility to even improve beyond the initial proposals we get. And then I agree 100% with the group. Before the board makes a decision, we need to have that county plan. It's just not going to help us get good proposals right now. That's, I think, what we need to focus on.
Supervisor Bramer, then Beatty, then Steve. Are you're Pat? Okay.
I agree with Jeff and Tom and some of the people. I think we need to put our focus on putting out a solid RFP, putting our resources and efforts into seeing how we can make this airport now feasible. In my opinion, we have a 50-year track record of showing how much money we spend to keep it going, and I'm a strong supporter of the airport. I think it's great for Warren County and so forth. But I think the reality of it is we've got a strong financial record of over 50 years of showing that we as a county haven't been able to make it a viable moneymaker. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. There could be a discussion on that. But the fact of the matter is, putting out a solid RFP and a potential company wanting to take it over and alleviating the Warren County taxpayers of $500,000 to $600,000 a year going towards the airport, and putting that money into maybe roads that 99% of people use, or maybe other, Enston, out of the SUNY Adirondack. To me, that's a better and more viable avenue of using our financial resources here up in the county. So I agree with Jeff. Let's not put too much effort into now trying to make this a viable operation. I think we've had plenty of opportunity. We've had more than enough discussions, although we don't always get the information, but we have a financial history of showing that it's not viable. And so I would recommend that we go forward with strengthening this RFP, get it out there. Let's not wait. I agree with Jeff. Let's not wait. And Travis, let's not wait a year and 3 months. Let's get it done. Let's get it out there. And let's see if there are potential people who want to lease the airport. And it's a win-win situation. I don't see how anybody loses on that. And somebody can second guess us tomorrow and say, well, geez, Doug, we could have made money at that airport. But we haven't. The bottom line is we're spending $500,000 to $600,000 a year. So don't tell me, well, we could have, and we should have, and we might. It's not happening, gang. It's 50 years. It's not happening. It hasn't happened. And as a businessman, I love the fact that we now are looking at putting out an RFP to see if other people can alleviate our financial responsibility, and maybe they can do it better, and because maybe they are more of an expert at running an airport. So that's where I come from. So I like what you're saying here. Let's get a strengthened RFP. Let's do it faster. Let's see what's out there.
No, and thank you, Supervisor Beatty. I think not only do I agree with you, I think the majority of supervisors agree with you, and I think that's why we're in this process to really have these discussions that we've been having for a very long time. But what we're hearing from taxpayers is they want to save their money too. So hopefully throughout this entire process we can see an expedited process with the RFP, but going out and making sure that we're taking every opportunity to save the taxpayer money as well. So point well taken. Steve, and then Jeff?
Yeah, I was just going to interject too and say that, if we wanted to look at some other airports that are going through the similar process that we are and whatnot, and see some of the pitfalls and maybe some positives. I know Columbia County is one example. They're in the same process right now of contract negotiation and whatnot. And, it might be something to look at. Just if you have any questions or any concerns that either exist currently right now with the operations at the airport, or what you're possibly looking at for future operations at the airport. It may or may not be working or worth looking into based on what they're going through and what they're having struggled with. So,
is that something the group's been taking a look at, Columbia County?
I haven't individually, but I believe Ross has looked at the process.
So can you send that information back as well? Because that's a great...
the lease here for Columbia
Okay.
County, and an email that I had sent to Supervisor Garrity after having the discussion.
I was going to bring that up because there was a recent article that just came up that I hadn't had a chance to pass out yet, but there was a lot of cons that were going back and forth on their current negotiations, and it might be something that we can look at to avoid the same similar scenario.
Could you email that article to all of us?
I can, yes.
That would be great.
Yep.
Thank you. Jeff?
I just wanted to, agree with Supervisor Beatty, with his comments, and the...
It was a great meeting.
The,
sorry, is that out loud?
I'm not done yet, though.
Oh, okay.
But also give credit to the board for considering the municipal operation, because the difference, what has been occurring for decades has been the county taking on the burden of maintenance, but not controlling the revenue. So I think that the board deserves some credit, at least for considering it, because every one of the municipal operations that's in the black controls fuel sales and other hangar revenues. So I think that's the big difference is, the county has never been in the black at this airport, but the county has also, at least not in recent decades that I'm familiar with, has never controlled the revenue. So I think that's the effort of the board members that have come to me and saying, hey, what are the revenues? And that's why Ross put together that table. What are the revenues that are at stake here? And what are the, what is the revenue potential as a starting point? And I think that's, this is really the process that occurred back 7 or 8 years ago, I guess 9 years ago, when Empire East was at the end of their term. I think they had been, you guys know how long they had been at the airport, Empire East?
5 years maybe.
Empire East went through several variations with Melody
Right.
and then
Right.
Matt and then Kim.
But,
That was 10 years, I believe.
Right,
Before
so-
that was Paul Morford.
right, and they did the fuel sales before that. So I think the good news is, and I think the board deserves a credit to look at this as a whole and consider all options, because this hasn't been done in the past. And it is not an easy venture, but I'm glad to take the time to do that thorough review. So.
Great. And just going through the items on our agenda, I think we've discussed really the attachments, and as you can see, one of those attachments was the county FBO agreement in Columbia County, but having that recent article and what they're going through will be helpful. You know, at this point in time, is there any old business that you would like brought up? We don't have any referrals from facilities. I didn't know if there's any you wanted to make over this month. So,
I'll bring it up under old business.
Sure.
What's the status of the self-service fuel farm? When is our estimate of when that'll be back online?
I am still trying to get our vendor, Northeast Petroleum, out here to initiate repairs. I've made numerous calls to them, and we're working as hard as we can to get on their schedule for repair.
And related to self-service, I've now noticed those similar stands will come with a large display, so a pilot who's fueling the far end of a plane can see how many gallons he or she is putting in the plane. Do you know if we could get one of those large displays on our self-service fuel dispenser?
We'll touch base. You can show me what you're talking about.
Okay. Email you some photos.
Yeah.
question?
I
Steve?
was just going to say, the way the pump was set up currently right now, it's either a predetermined gallon amount or a top-off. So unless you're looking for a standalone sign, I don't know if there's a way to physically integrate that unless we get a new
I'll
pump
email you the
altogether.
photos too.
I know what you're talking about.
You've seen them now? Yeah.
I've seen the signs. We can certainly make something bigger possibly, but
Okay.
Dr. Schwenker?
Just a question for Ross, the status of the VOR attachment.
I don't believe the FAA is going to repair it. The repairs are extensive, parts are hard to come by, and the VOR Vortec is scheduled for decommissioning, and I would not expect that to get repaired.
Any other questions or any items under new business?
Just
Tom?
one observation, I had somebody show me a picture of them in front of a Cessna 152, and they were proud to have recently soloed. This is a Warren County, born and bred, lives here, professional, and unfortunately I recognized the plane. I said, that's not a local plane. He says, no, I did my flight training down in Schenectady. And so it makes me sad as a Warren County taxpayer that a young professional from this community is taking his money to Schenectady to learn how to fly airplanes. And again, it goes to my cup half full analogy that that we're not realizing the potential of this airport. He felt that Richmore Aviation has, I think, is it Part 141 flight school? 141 flight school, which apparently a more regimented training regime appealed to him. They also have a tower that we can't do anything about, but it's just one anecdote of somebody who actually left our area to get flight training, and there's really no reason for it. They should be able to get training at our airport.
And under our chart, when we're looking at that would come under the pilot training program? That's an optional?
Correct, yeah, and again, I don't know if you want to mandate that an FBO provide a Part 141 flight school, but it certainly would be appealing for an augmented flight school, more planes, more instructors, maybe a set ground school, and more advertising. Because again, I think there are people out there who would be willing to fly, who could fly, who have the resources to fly, and yet it's not being, I don't see it being promoted, which is unfortunate for our pilot community, and unfortunate for the taxpayers.
Right. And Brian, I mean, I hope that your working group, and again, you know, when they meet, they're reviewing these YouTube meetings or looking at the minutes, which are just a summary, but if those main points could go back as well, because I think that that's a good point, and one, again, that's the purpose of this committee. So, point taken. Is there anything else that anyone would like to discuss before we're ahead of schedule? but it seems like we've put a lot of time in today, which is great. Travis?
I just had a question. Does Harrison do, yes, training?
Yeah.
How does that work? Does he work with Rich Air? Does he give a percentage of his fees to the county or to Rich Air? Or how does that work? Do a comparison. When I completed my license 30-plus years ago, Paul Moore at the FBO, Glens Falls Flight Center, there were 4 rental airplanes, 3 instructors, and you could go to the desk, sign up for an instructor, the book was there. Okay, now if I do a flight review, I have to call Jim or call Harrison or go somewhere else. And, you know, you can find it, but it takes an effort to find it. If you're a new guy walking on the street, you really find out it's easier to go to Schenectady.
And sort of an informal relationship that Harrison Greer would have.
Right, and Jim's relationship, he's not part of Rich Air, so yes, his cards are on the counter, and Lee Fair is out there with 1 airplane.
Yeah, Harrison is collaborating with Lee Fair. Lee Fair is Jim Barrett, who has an arrangement with Rich Air to provide the service for flight training at the airport that's required under his contract. So he's a third party providing that contractual service to the airport. So they have those 2 aircraft between Harrison and Jim Barrett working together under the umbrella of Lee Fair. They have an arrangement with Rich Air to provide those services. And they're, of course, they've come to me, they provide their insurance certificates indemnifying the county so that the county is covered for those type of operations. And, that's something, that, we definitely should take into consideration in the RFP process is, making sure that we have a space identified and available for these type of services that are desirable and would be, possibly ranked favorably in the evaluation process.
I do think Harrison is less tied to Lee Fair these days because he got enough training hours to do his own operation. He's a fitness drill dealer too, so.
Yeah.
Supervisor McDonald?
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman. I am curious, and this might be an impossible question, I'm directing it towards you, but I don't know if you would know. How much traffic does that Schenectady Flight School actually get on an annual basis?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Again, I didn't expect you to, but I think that's
I know their students, fly up and do practice approaches. I hear them on the radio. They do, they use our airport for flight training. That's like our students would likely use their airport for flight training. You always need a destination. There's requirements for training. You have to, have 3-legged trips and things like that.
The only reason I ask, because I do agree with you that it would be a great thing to have at our airport. I'm just curious if we would be able to bring in the type of volume to sustain something like that. That's only just plain devil's advocate here, because I would love to see something like that happen, don't get me wrong, but just logistically speaking, how much traffic does the Schenectady one get, and then if there's another one up here of equitable means, so to speak, then is there going to be enough to go around? Just something to consider.
Yeah, like with any of these services, always a question of, are you just diluting the existing, marketplace and, stealing customers from another airport, or are you truly attracting additional business and development, economic development?
Jeff?
Yeah, I was thinking of some of the business out of our airport. They fill the gaps with scenic tours and kind of those scenic flights, which I think we have an advantage over airports to our south. So that may be something that we want to maybe, I don't know if we listed it as one of the services that could be an optional service, would be scenic tours. I think that ties in well with our community. And I think that's what Lee Fair does. It's what
they do that. They do some aerial photography and stuff like that as well. There's still different kind of services you can build into that model.
We had a helicopter operating out Bruce Mallory's out, but he's moved on. But he did that too.
Yeah, the helicopter
in addition to
tours are popular.
doing instruction.
Maybe putting an area in there for that, for consideration.
I believe Richmond has some relationship with Schenectady Community College also.
He does. Yeah.
So, lastly, I assume we'll see this as we get closer, and once a draft RFP does come up, a scoring sheet, a rubrics of some sort that we'll be able to take a look at and weigh in on that as well. Okay. Is there any other business come before the committee? Claudia, you're still good? Moved on. Okay. So we'll keep our next meeting as scheduled, and hopefully, have that feedback in the meantime, talk a little bit more about some of those optional versus required, and then to the extent you have additional documents you could provide to us beforehand, Ross, Jeff, and Brian from the working group, that would be very helpful.
All right.
Sound good, Ross and Jeff? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time this morning.